Hello and welcome to Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. By the late 1990s, the fervor of satanic panic had died down. The world had moved on to newer, actual problems, and of course had created new ones to worry about as well. The imaginary notion that the world's children were being lost to the mythical ghost man had fallen out of fashion, and what was in fashion was talking about whether or not there were dark underworld dealings going on in daycares. But what's that old saying that people like to say to folks like me that don't believe in the devil? The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. People might have left satanic panic in the 80s and moved on from the devil, but the devil hadn't moved on from them. Far away from the American phenomenon, across the sea in Italy, the devil was still very much alive, and he was very much a part of a series of horrific events, acts carried out by human hands, as they always are. This is the story of the Beasts of Satan killings. Let's get into it. (1998). In and around Milan, Italy, a small group of heavy metal fans had formed. They shared all of the same interests in music and art and film, and they were obsessed with the devil. Satan has a very powerful hold over some people. He is the ultimate villain, the fallen angel, one who committed such atrocities against God that he fell from the highest position to the lowest. He is the symbol for all that is most evil, most depraved, and most dangerous. This makes him a magnet for people drawn to the dark and a hero to those who want to commit terrible crimes and put the blame elsewhere. Satan's purpose as a mythical figure is to lure humans away from God, to test them, to tempt them. Without a villain, there is no story. Without a bad guy, there is no good guy. Without someone to beat, there is no chance for victory. Mythology requires a villain in every story, and Satan is the ultimate villain. I used to be terrified of the devil. I grew up being told he was waiting at every turn to take over my body. I had Sunday school teachers and people in my life, not really family, but they would tell me that certain words and actions would summon him and invite him into my life. And I believed every word of it until I didn't. The funny thing about the devil is, when you stop believing in him, he completely disappears. I have no more fear, I have no more anxiety, and the only time I ever think about the devil is when I'm researching a story like this one. Now, if you believe in the devil, that's your prerogative. I get it. I once did too, and I understand the power the mythology can have over people. For the most part, Satan serves as a type of boogeyman. He's a warning that you better do this and not that, you better live your life a certain way, or he will become part of your life. But as all villains do, Satan has a place in our culture, and that place reaches throughout every culture and every corner of the earth. In this group of metalheads were 8 main figures. I'm going to butcher their Italian names once, and then I'll only be using their first names after that. The group consisted of Andrea Volpe, Nicola Sapone, Paolo Leoni, Mario Macchione, Pietro Ghieri, Marco Zampolo, Eros Monterosso, and Elisabetta Ballarin. This group doesn't quite classify as a cult, as there were no requirements about paying funds or strict obedience to an unquestionable leader, things like that, but it had other cult-like qualities. In Italy, they call it a sect, a group that has pulled away from the mainstream and chooses to exist in isolation. The founder of the group is Nicola Sapone, and he brings Andrea Volpe to the group, and Andrea quickly rises to become a leader. The tenets of the group are loyalty and secrecy, and each member is told that once they become a member of the cult, they can never leave. If they ever try to leave, they must unalive themselves, and if they don't, the other cult members will kill them and their entire families. Andrea Volpe, who most consider one of the leaders of the group, was very dark and good-looking, and people say he had kind of a spell over the people around him, especially the females. This is Elisabetta Ballarin. She was born in Milan in 1985. She was a troubled kid who ended up leaving school and running away from home to go and live with Andrea in this tiny cabin in the woods. The articles I read call this a chalet, but as you can see, it's not much more than a shack in the forest. Andrea and Elisabetta were in love, and they spent all of their time together, mostly hidden away in the chalet doing drugs or coming out only to play music or see other bands play music. The members of the group were not only heavy metal music fans, they were also musicians. Many of them had dropped out of school and spent their days sleeping and their nights partying and playing music. They were all very interested in Satanism, and wherever the group was hanging out, you could be sure that there were plenty of books on the occult there. Their rooms were covered in posters and stickers and images associated with devil worship, lots of 666 stuff, lots of goat horns, things like that. Just your run-of-the-mill devil stuff. On the fringes of the group were some newer members that weren't really in the inner circle. They were 16-year-old Fabio Tollis, who played the bass in one of the bands where the members were all associated with the Beasts of Satan. This is what they were calling themselves. And the other was Fabio's girlfriend, 19-year-old Chiara Marino. On January 17, 1998, there was a show at a venue called the Midnight Pub. Fabio and Chiara went to see the band that was playing that night, and they told their family members that they had plans to meet up with other members of the group. Now, they probably didn't say, "Hey, I'm going to hang out with the devil worshippers tonight," but they let their family members know they had plans. They left their respective homes with those family members having absolutely no idea that they would never see their loved ones again. At some point in the evening, Andrea Volpe asked Fabio and Chiara to step out of the club with him. They were there listening to the band when Andrea approached them and told them that because it was a full moon, it was time to perform a ritual. Fabio went to a payphone and called home to tell his father that he wouldn't be returning, that he was spending the night with a girl. Europe. Much more liberal than here in the States. Fabio's father didn't want him to stay out, but when Fabio started to argue, Nicola Sapone grabbed the phone and hung it up. Andrea talked them into getting into his car and going for a drive with him. They had no way of knowing that his plan was already in motion. Andrea didn't like Fabio. He saw Fabio as a threat. Andrea, as I said earlier, kind of fancied himself the leader of the group, and he felt, for whatever reason, that Fabio might be gunning for his position. Andrea told others in the cult that he was going to sacrifice Chiara, Fabio's girlfriend, to teach Fabio a lesson. Others claimed that Andrea didn't like Chiara because she looked like the Virgin Mary, and that made Andrea hate her. Andrea drove Fabio and Chiara about 30 miles northwest of Milan, where the other members of the cult were waiting. There in the woods, they built a large bonfire. They gathered in a circle and took more drugs. They had taken drugs earlier in the evening as well. Once they were all high, Andrea gathered a little group of accomplices to stand behind him, and he told Fabio that Chiara had to be sacrificed. Fabio was first angry and then terrified when he realized that Andrea was not joking. When Fabio tried to defend his girlfriend and then they both tried to fight back, they were both murdered. Chiara was stabbed directly through the heart, and Fabio was beaten with a hammer. When they were dead, group member Nicola Sapone shoved chestnut leaves down their throats as part of some satanic ritual. He then dipped a cigarette in their blood and smoked it and yelled, "Now you're both zombies. Try and get out of this hole if you dare." You know, the devil worship thing is very silly to me, and it's silly because these people are just evil. They're just plain evil. The devil has nothing to do with it. This is just a group of really shitty human beings. To be able to do something like this to another human being, they love to use the devil as an excuse, but they don't need an excuse. They're awful all on their own. The members of this cult then dug a large pit and threw Fabio and Chiara into it. They covered the pit with dirt, and the next day, the couple's parents began what would become a 6-year search for their loved ones. It's just awful. Can you imagine going for a ride with people you consider to be friends, and then they do this to you? It's just not only an obvious betrayal, but so inherently evil, and I'm sure they took some kind of sick pleasure in feeling as though they had gotten away with these murders, because they did for years. One of the sadder elements of this story, of these murders, is the fact that Fabio and Chiara's families had no idea what happened to their loved ones. Chiara's mother, Lisa, never stopped looking for her daughter. Fabio's father, Michel Tollis, became somewhat obsessed with finding out what had happened to his son. He read Fabio's journals, and he was shocked to learn of the intense and all-consuming nature of the group that his son was involved in. Fabio's diary talked about rituals the group would perform, and the rituals often included gross and humiliating acts, things that Fabio admitted to being uncomfortable and embarrassed about, but that he went through with in order to stay in good standing with the little cult, this little sect. Fabio's father began to keep records of the symbols he saw in Fabio's journal, and he would compare them to symbols he saw around their area of Milan, where people had written them or painted them on concrete walls and buildings. Michel would talk to other people involved in Satanism and always asked for help in finding his son. He was really a broken man, a man who was never the same after his son disappeared, and for years he devoutly remains his son's strongest advocate. But there is no trace of Fabio or of Chiara, and Michel Tollis begins to fear he will never know what happened to his son. January 24th, 2004. The local police, called the Carabinieri, are called to the Villaresi Canal near a small dam. As you can see here, the waters are not fast flowing. It is more of a small, slow-moving river. Someone has called the police here because there is a young man walking around in a daze. He seems to be in pain. He is screaming and squirming and swearing at passerbys. He eventually tells the police that he is on drugs. He has taken heroin, cocaine, and a drug the Italians call Tavor, which is lorazepam. This man tells the police he hasn't slept in 36 hours. He is screaming that his girlfriend needs help, and he begs the police to go to her. A few miles away, the police find two cars. One of the cars has been crashed into the guardrail surrounding the dam. The second car, a gray Uno, is stuck on the bridge with its rear end backed into the bridge wall. One of the windows of the Uno is smashed out, and police can clearly see blood on the shattered glass. In the driver's seat sits a woman who is unresponsive. She has overdosed. Both the young man and the young woman are rushed to the hospital. They are Andrea Volpe and Elisabetta Ballarin. After Elisabetta is saved and becomes more coherent, she begins to talk to the police, and what she tells them sends them immediately to the shack in the woods, the chalet. Meanwhile, back at the bridge, police have discovered that the gray Uno stuck on that bridge belongs to a girl named Mariangela Pezzotta. She is Andrea's ex-girlfriend. Police contact Mariangela's parents, who tell them that she had gone out the night before and had never come home. The search at the canal continues, and police find Mariangela's handbag in the first car, the car that was crashed on the guardrail. They also find her cigarettes and her car keys. They do not, however, find Mariangela. Back at the chalet, the police are going through the house. It is an absolute mess. There is spoiled food left out, clothing thrown on the floor, and the place looks as if it's never been cleaned. There are books open all over the house and garbage stacked in the corners. In one room, the police find a group of lit candles just burning unattended in the home. They find a snake in a glass enclosure, and they find a lot of drugs. After a thorough search of the chalet, word reaches the detectives that the owner of the car on the bridge is missing, and now they know they might be looking for a person that is either being held against their will or perhaps worse. At the chalet, they continue their search outside. They spread out and cover every inch of the surrounding grounds. In some places, they even dig through snowbanks looking for Mariangela. They look through the garage and the garden, and then they come to the greenhouse. As soon as they enter, they know. The dirt has been freshly moved, and with just a few swipes, they uncover a hand with a watch on it. It is Mariangela Pezzotta, and her body is still warm. As they unearth her, they are shocked to see that her face is completely disfigured. I can't go into much detail here, but it was terrible. Her face was badly deformed, and she was missing some teeth. Mariangela was not just Andrea Volpe's ex-girlfriend, she was his partner of 9 years, and at one point they had been engaged to be married. Mariangela's body was removed from the greenhouse and taken to the coroner for examination. Back at the hospital, Elisabetta is continuing to speak to the police. She tells them that 2 nights before, she was in the chalet, in the kitchen, and Mariangela came to the house. Mariangela and Andrea were sitting at the kitchen table, and Andrea yelled to Elisabetta to get the drugs and prepare 2 speedballs, as if it were a plate of cookies. Elisabetta told police she wondered why Andrea told her to prepare only 2, because there were 3 people in the home. 1 was a guest. Then, as Elisabetta was preparing the doses, she heard a shot. She ran to the kitchen table where Andrea was standing, screaming and holding a gun. Mariangela was laying on the floor, gasping for air and bleeding from her neck. Upon hearing this story, police obviously went and located Andrea Volpe and brought him in for questioning. Andrea tells the police that he called Mariangela to the chalet to bring him a VHS tape he wanted to watch. When she arrived, he claims that they were messing around with a gun and it accidentally went off. Sure, Dracula. Sure. I'm sure that's what happened. Like, give me a break. Elisabetta tells police that in truth, there was a violent argument over the fact that Mariangela knew too much about the cult and also about the 1998 murders. Elisabetta tells police that after the shooting, Andrea called Nicola Sapone to come and help him deal with the body. Nicola arrived at the chalet and said to Andrea, "You can't even kill a person right." Andrea asked what he meant. Nicola said, "She's not dead." The 2 men then carried Mariangela's body to the greenhouse and beat her face in with a shovel to kill her, which is why she was so disfigured. They then buried her in the dirt with Elisabetta's help. Nicola then went home and acted as if he had just been on a usual everyday errand. Andrea and Elisabetta then did more drugs and decided to get rid of Mariangela's car, but they were so high they could barely walk, let alone drive. The plan was to drive Mariangela's car into the canal. Andrea, who was driving in front, crashed Elisabetta's father's car into the guardrail, and then Elisabetta, who was following him, crashed Mariangela's gray Uno on the bridge. Apparently, Elisabetta was so high that she thought there was a demon in the car with her, and she started kicking out the windows trying to escape the car. That's why the window was broken. She cut herself badly on the shattered glass, and that was the blood the police saw when they arrived. Boy, as someone who has never done drugs, that just does not sound fun to me. I'm sorry, that just does not sound like a whole lot of fun to me. I know they have their appeal, but I just don't like drugs because I have lost so many people to drugs. So many people that I love have struggled with drugs, and I don't like drugs. Andrea Volpe, in custody, is then placed under arrest. After several days, after the drugs wore off and he realized the evidence against him was strong, he decided to cooperate.
La Mariangela, quando è arrivata, mi ha dato un colpo di telefono, per cui io sapevo che era arrivata. Elisabetta è andata nello chalet, io sono uscito, che avevo già la pistola in mano, però non riuscivo nemmeno a tenerla in mano, talmente che ero fatto, non riuscivo a tenerla in mano. E comunque sono andato a aprire il cancello, lei quando mi ha visto la pistola in mano mi ha chiesto: cosa ci fai con la pistola in mano? E io ho detto: no, niente, sai, l'ambiente in cui sono, tengo la pistola così, e l'ho messa in tasca la pistola. Per cui quando poi è entrata, che si è seduta sul tavolo, lì abbiamo incominciato comunque a parlare come se niente fosse. Dopo 5 minuti è arrivata Elisabetta imbracciando il fucile, la Mariangela si è girata e ha guardato Elisabetta col fucile e poi si è girata verso di me guardandomi con un'espressione. Io penso che lì un'idea abbia capito quello che è per succedere. Io ho mandato poi dopo Elisabetta in cucina per andare a fare il caffè. C'è stata tipo una discussione tra me e Mariangela, c'è stata un attimo un battibecco comunque. E io lì ho chiuso gli occhi e ho sparato.
As word of Mariangela's murder spread throughout Milan, it reached Fabio's father, Michel, who has at this point become an expert on this underground heavy metal scene in the area. Well, Michel goes directly to the police. The police were astounded at what he brings with him. He has basically become an investigator. He has binders and files full of photography and diary pages and names and dates, places, symbols. He has always suspected that his son and Chiara were murdered by the people in this heavy metal scene, and now he is sure. The police take information obtained from Michel to Andrea, and as they tell Andrea of the heartbroken father who has never stopped searching for his son, some form of humanity is awakened in Andrea Volpe, and he confesses to everything. He apparently broke down and felt remorseful and blamed the drugs he was taking at the time. Well, Andrea, that's why we don't do hard drugs, buddy, because they make you crazy and they ruin your life. Andrea tells investigators everything they need to know, and then he leads them to the woods where Fabio and Chiara have been buried for 6 years now. Investigators uncover the bodies, and after examination, they are returned to the families for burial, and area residents demand justice. February 22, 2005. Both Andrea Volpe and Pietro Ghieri are sentenced for the murders in 1998. Andrea gets 30 years, Pietro gets 16. Andrea is then convicted of Mariangela's murder as well. In June of 2005, 5 additional members of the cult were tried and sentenced to shorter prison terms for their part in the killings in 1998. Paolo Leone, Marco Zampolo, Eris Monterosso, and Elisabetta Ballarin were sentenced as well, with their sentences ranging from 24 to 26 years. Andrea Volpe served his time and was released from prison in 2020. He is currently studying education. Elisabetta is also free and working at a restaurant in northern Italy. They are very lucky that they are Italians and not Americans, because they would never see the light of day here. I don't know how I feel about them seeing the light of day there. I don't know if that's really fair.
Tanti anni fa ero una ragazzina che aveva delle fortissime fragilità e non era in grado soprattutto di riconoscere quello che fosse giusto e fosse sbagliato. Una personalità manipolatrice forte come quella di Andrea Volpe ha avuto una facile presa su di me. Dopo pochissimi mesi, dopo 2 o 3 mesi dal nostro primo incontro, Volpe mi ha iniziata alle droghe pesanti. Per droghe pesanti intendo eroina e cocaina. Adesso sono una donna di 30 anni che ha studiato, che è arrivata a capire se stessa, e penso anche, grazie alla comprensione di me, di poter comprendere anche un po' gli altri. È un po' quello che mi è stato insegnato anche quando forse soprattutto quando mi sono avvicinata alla fede. Se devo dare una data d'inizio posso anche ritrovarla, perché era il 5° anniversario della morte di Mariangela. E si stava svolgendo nella sezione femminile del carcere la messa, e ho sentito forte la spinta a fare la comunione. Nel mio percorso ci sono state delle persone molto importanti e fondamentali, e queste sono state la mia mamma e Silvio Pezzotta. È grazie alla sua apertura nei miei confronti, alla sua possibilità, che io mi sono concessa io stessa appunto una possibilità, un futuro, altrimenti sarei rimasta ferma davanti alla tragedia che avevo vissuto, e difficilmente sarei riuscita a smuovermi, ad andare oltre, a perdonarmi. Non so, io spero sempre che la mia triste vicenda possa essere di esempio a qualcuno e possa servire a a scongiurare gli errori che ho compiuto io. È meglio evitare tutte le sostanze, è meglio stare lontani e vivere appieno la propria esistenza.
Now, it's important to note that there are people who strongly believe there are many more deaths tied to the beasts of Satan. In 1996, 23-year-old group member Christian Frigerio disappeared and has never been found. 2 people associated with the cult were found hanged. In 1999, Angelo Lombardo, who was friends with many of the group members, was found burned alive in the cemetery he worked at, and another man was found burned in his car in the woods in 2004. These deaths have not been definitively tied to the beasts of Satan, but many believe they are, and some of those believers are investigators and police officers. Shortly after the murder convictions, a Roman Catholic university tied to the Vatican began offering courses on possession, exorcism, and demons in an attempt to help people spot the signs that someone had been influenced by the devil. That's somewhat disappointing to hear, but not surprising. It's always much easier to blame an evil spirit than it is to face the cold, hard truth. Some people are simply evil. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. Like the video if you liked the video, and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to support me. It helps. You can also join my Patreon, and if you do, there will be some bonus content for you. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.